what I love that I really want to point out in what you said, because it's different than what you hear most people say, which is awesome,
Yeah.
is that your brand becomes a collaboration between you as the business owner and your audience. Because one of the things that I teach people in sales and marketing is that your business is not about you.
Yes.
Right? Your business is about the client's problem that you solve.
Yeah.
And so this idea that that can extend to your brand
Yeah.
is phenomenal. And is what it's only going to really create even more cohesion and more relationship between you and your audience. Hi, I'm Erin Marcus, former corporate executive turned entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Conquer Your Business. Welcome to the Ready Yet podcast. We're excited to bring you more than 100 episodes of interviews and insights designed to help entrepreneurs get the financial and emotional freedom they need in order to build a business and a life they're proud of. All right. And welcome to this episode of the Ready Yet podcast. We're playing this one by ear, not that you're not going to be fine, because I actually didn't even give you the debrief of how we do this. I give you a soft little introduction. Today, I'm here with Deeon Brown, and then I let you give yourself a much more interesting introduction. So with no prep work whatsoever this time, right? Learning how to build the plane as we're flying it, as it were.
That's actually an amazing episode name. Learning
right?
to build the plane as you're flying.
how not to do that. Exactly. But seriously, before we get into all of it, tell everybody a little bit. I can't wait for this conversation. So tell everybody who you are, what you do, anything cool you want to share, and we'll just jump in.
Hey, what's up, everybody? If you're listening to my voice for the first time, I am Deeon Brown, and I am so happy to be on this podcast show with Erin, who I know does an amazing job with you guys, who supports you and loves you and pours into you. So for a second, I hope to be able to pour into you too. By profession, I am a brand manager who turned to a CEO, who experienced COVID and became a coach and podcaster. What that means for you guys is that I have a really good idea around branding, marketing, all facets of that spectrum. But I also spent a lot of time working with individuals to understand more about their brand, more about how they thought, how they wanted to position themselves in the world, how they wanted to reconfigure and rebrand themselves. And I took that into my coaching business. So if you want to have a conversation about how you can be a little different, a little better, how you can evolve, maybe de-evolve, whatever you want to do in this moment, I hope to bring some good value to you guys. And I know this woman is definitely going to knock it out the park. So thank you for having me on.
Awesome. No pressure. Here we go.
Okay.
I have 800 questions. One of the ones I'm just going to let's just get in some tactical subject matter expertise here, because I definitely want to share your personal story, because the last time we chatted, you were randomly decided to also be a DJ, the way that I randomly also decide to do things out of the blue. So I love that and how that shapes you as a human. So I want to give them more of a flavor of you personally, but I also know that my clients, even my 7-figure clients, understanding, I think in the small business world, understanding what a brand is and why it's so important as this foundational piece to be able to scale. Like, I don't know if you want to riff, I can get more specific with my questions. Like, the reason this comes up is I had a conversation today with a great guy, who in his one business is serving enterprise level clients in the billion-dollar world and way undercharging at the individual coaching level.
Sure.
And to me, because I think like you do, from a brand perspective, that messes you up.
Potentially. Right? Potentially.
Well, the way that he was presenting it, it can confuse the marketplace.
I think so. So here's what I will say, Erin, that I think that brand in its simplest, most deconstructed form is what people say about you, your value system, and your ability to deliver, right? Like,
Totally.
who's Erin? What's her value system? What's her ability to deliver, right? And And that works for consumer packaged goods, that works for tech, that works for coaching, works in every sector, right? Brand is the accumulation of experiences, thoughts that people have about what it is that you deliver to the market. Now, we can take brands and create logos around them, create messaging around them, right? In order to drive how people should feel, in order to scale what people think about our brand, in order to redefine the way that people engage with our brand. But in essence, it's just how people feel. It's what people say. It's when I say, hey, I love that painting behind you, right? And for the folks who are listening, there's a beautiful painting of this person, I believe it's a woman, raising her hand to what looks like the sky. It's beautiful painting, right? I could say I love that painting, and you could have some really great things to say about the artist, or you could not, right? What you say about that person and how I feel about the painting together forms that person's brand. So with the example that you gave, if the person is delivering a high level product at industry cost as some form of an introduction to get into $1 billion market,
That's
at which point they create super advocates for themselves that
yes.
will then tell other people about their product and service, where they could charge a more fair rate to what the person's revenue is that they're working with, or what the revenue is that the person represents as an executive. Then they've done a really great way to introduce themselves into a new market. If they're doing it as a way of undervaluing what they bring, then that will be the conversation around that person's services. Person's really great. Person seems to be doing it for less. I don't really know if that person is worth more, because that's what that is. Or, you know, we also in business talk about lost leadership, right? So if you are driving a price down, then it can also deflate pricing for other similar products. But lost leadership can have an advantage, again, if you do it as a short-term introduction, as a way of breaking into a new market by driving more conversation and transaction. So I don't really know what the person's purpose is, but anyone who's listening, if you want to bring it to a new market, you might utilize a lower price to get your brand out there, to get people talking about your brand, engaging with your brand. But if you do that for too long, not only will you undercut your own prices, but you will actually hurt the industry by having a segment of individuals believe that the services are actually priced much lower than what they should be.
My big takeaway from what you just said, and I absolutely agree with it, is the word intention.
Yep.
Right? Like, I think the key to everything you just said would be, regardless of what your decisions are, is that you actually made decisions and did this intentionally, as opposed to random acts of business that lead to a diluted or a confusing brand.
Yeah.
Right? Because they haven't been thought out.
So yeah, I would say intention. I would also say that you have some understanding of the industry, of historic trends, that you understand results, right? Because intention is one thing, and that's a really important part, but you also need to understand the results of your actions, right? Because sometimes what we intend is not the most probable result, and you need
or
to
the result we get at all.
Yeah, because just because you wanted to do something doesn't mean that you are likely to get there, right? So having an understanding of both, right? This is my intent. This is why I'm doing it. This is what my aim is. But also, I am more likely to get to that aim because there's some historic data, or there's some trends that I'm looking at, some data that I'm looking at, some folks that I've talked to that tell me that I will more than likely reach the goal that my intents align to, as opposed to doing something,
just because I'm
solid about doing it, and then it causes all this chaos because you didn't realize that the thing you were doing, that you set out to do, was actually going to be harmful.
Was actually never going to work. No, absolutely. I love it. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
So in terms of business owners, I don't want to say like what's some of the big pitfalls. I mean, maybe that's a it's not very specific question for you. But one of the things that I see that I'd love to get your take is either people fall on either side. Either they obsess over a brand almost prematurely,
Yep.
or they ignore it and it happens to them without their influence. Like, what are some of the bumpers we can put in our gutters so that we don't fall off either side of that?
Okay. So I'm going to divide these into two very specific thoughts, right? I'm going to say that when we're talking about people that put too much into their brand, we're really talking about typically the visual representation of their
Yes,
brand.
I agree.
It's like the logos, the color, the tagline, the website colors, right? Like we try to get things perfect, and mostly because we see this thing that is abstract in our mind and we're trying to make it concrete. We're trying to take something that we individually see and we're trying to translate that using the language that we have in order to do so, which means that if we're not marketers, if we're not branders, we actually don't really have the language. So it takes us longer, takes us more communication. When the thing that we're trying to do isn't translated well, it makes us a little worried, a little anxious, a little nervous, right? And we become obsessive around it, right? Because we want to get it right. What I will say to your audience and to small business owners, medium-sized business owners, entrepreneurs in general, is that our job is to communicate in the language of our market, not only what we see in our head, right? So just because I see the color blue doesn't mean that's going to resonate with my audience, right? I'm providing a service for my audience. I'm providing a product for my audience. So I need there to be some collaboration in terms of like what I'm providing and maybe what resonates with them. I think that there are things that do well in market in terms of branding for a reason. There's a lot of market studies, there's a lot of information, and I know that we like to be outside the box, but we first have to understand the box. We need to know why the box is the box. We need to understand why the box is there, who decided this was a box, whether it was the industry or the audience, right? We need to figure that out, right? And then we can start making those level of decisions. But I think we need to first start in that space. So that's
what I love that I really want to point out in what you said, because it's different than what you hear most people say, which is awesome, is that your brand becomes a collaboration between you as the business owner and your audience. Because one of the things that I teach people in sales and marketing is that your business is not about you.
Yes.
Right? Your business is about the client's problem that you solve.
Yeah.
And so this idea that can extend to your brand is phenomenal. And is what it's only going to really create even more cohesion and more relationship between you and your audience.
Right. Of course, because when we think about top of mind, it's not our mind. It's not the creator's mind.
Right. We're in our heads all the time.
Right. So how can I get top of mind for them is I need to understand what resonates with them, right? What's going to allow for our brand to be recognizable and easily attainable when they're trying to think about it or refer us business. And if we're not in that business, and some of it may be listening in on conversations on social media, some of it may be testing it with, social platforms, or testing it with people that you believe will be your customer. Some of it will be just market research, seeing what's out there and kind of just hedging your bets. The truth is that like we become obsessive over a logo that no one's seen outside of our community. Right. So we have to be like other businesses, the larger brands. Pepsi has gone through so many logo iterations. Samsung, so many logo iterations, right? And it's because as the times move, as the market moves, as the community that they're serving changes and evolves, so will that brand. So when we start to become fixed in our brand as a way of trying to create this monolith that everyone's going to adhere to and love and support, right? We become dated automatically, right? Once we make that choice, we have decided to become dated. And so we need to do more. Now, on the other spectrum sounds a bit more like reputation management, A lot of folks don't get into reputation management. They ignore what people are saying about their brand. They're ignoring like mentions on social media. They don't really hold any credence or value to Yelp reviews or any of these places where people have a public platform to discuss their brand. What I will say is this, that there was a period in time where folks, especially small business owners, were so obsessed around what people were saying about their brand that they took a lot of time, energy, and resources to answering every problem, every thought. They wanted to apologize for everything and thank everyone. Here's what we know. Most people that have median level experiences with your brand are not likely to leave any sort of review, feedback on social media. The ones that are generally happy are just happy. And what they're going to do is not leave a review. What they'll do instead is refer. They'll actually have one-on-one conversations to talk to other
They'll recommend you.
Yeah, they'll recommend you one-on-one with people who already trust and value their opinion. Now, the outliers will typically take to more public platforms to talk about your brand. The ones who had a really negative experience and the ones that had a really, really positive experience. What you don't want to happen is your outliers to become your medians. You don't want the people that are either having really horrible experiences only, right? Or it's only so positive that people become wary of the fact that you might be like doing your own reviews, right? Everything's 5 stars. No one ever has a complaint. We're like, how's this happening, right? So you want to make sure that that you're just delivering on your promise, which means that you're going to meet people with their expectations, which is perfect. Just don't expect that they may not be people that review, or you may have to ask them for the review because they're likely to refer you business. Everyone else, you should still pay attention to because those are opportunities to scale and fix your business by making your customer service better, by making your customer interaction better. Like those are opportunities to find out more about your business. Less a time to become overly apologetic, more to get more feedback as to how you can improve, make those improvements with that specific customer and let them start to redefine how they feel about your brand and how they present your brand to the public.
Love it. So where did this all come from? How did you get into all this?
How did I get into all this? I tell a really interesting story. It's a true story. I grew up in East New York in Brooklyn, and there are a few like sort of things that happened in my life. One of which was a tragedy that really had me sort of focused on the power of branding, but also really I grew up in like the 90s. So like it was like the era of like mega branding, right? It was like when like Nintendo was big and like Jordan was big and like the fashion houses, like the Gucci's of the world were big. Like everything was larger than life. For you guys that may be a little bit younger, like billboards were important, magazine and like print advertisement was important, right? We didn't have social media where you could create these one-on-one, more intimate relationships. You really only had what you saw. And what you saw is how you associated yourself, your value, your position in communities, who you were, what you aligned with, what your tribe looked like. And so I always wanted to know like how brands influenced not only people to want to live different lives, more affluent lives, healthier lives, but also it made people want to harm others over brands and material items, right?
Well, so I've got a decade on you, which means I grew up in Chicago in the 80s.
Got it. Okay.
And when it was really only later in high school when kids were getting killed because of the brand of their shoes.
Exactly. So when I talk about tragedies, I'm talking about stuff like that. Like there were some things happening in my life where I was kind of like, this person got killed over a
killed
jacket
over a brand.
Yeah,
100%.
brand. I just didn't understand it, but I also would see these like big billboards, right? And I'm like, there's some correlation between how we feel in this community and these billboards that we see and what we aspire for and how what we're aspiring towards is also creating harm and discord. And I didn't understand it. And so by the time I reached college, I was just all about branding. I was all about self-branding, but I was all about understanding brands. And that took me through a whole process. I was in market research for a bit, branding and color. I was in market development. I was in agency work. I just went through the gamut, the spectrum of what it is to be a marketer, social media, what have you. And that kind of culminated in me creating my own agency, but then also me realizing that there would be a trend at some point where technology would allow almost anyone to become a marketer. And what would that future look like, right? Like when the world becomes their own marketers, because we don't need the bigger agencies, the Satachis, and we don't need all of these big agencies to develop our marketing. You can use it with a phone, and that's where we are right now. So it's an exciting time to be in.
And it is crazy. I mean, when you grow up watching what you and I grew up watching, the idea that anybody down the block, especially like, I don't know about your specific, I know a little bit, like I grew up in public schools in Chicago in the 70s and 80s, right? Kids from 22 different countries. Nobody had any money. We were all working full-time jobs just to pay the, right? So the idea that anybody could effectively become a brand was insanity to me for the very, plus you have to remember, like, I spent the first 20 years of my life making sure no one knew what I was doing. So right, like, let's just, right. So this idea that you become a brand, this thing that when we were younger was larger than life.
Yep.
And you can do that individually, no matter who you are, based on the work and effort you put into it, right? And that also means telling everybody everything about you, which was exactly the opposite to everything I grew up learning. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Ready Yet podcast, brought to you by Conquer Your Business. With decades of experience, Conquer Your Business creates business and branding strategies that build multiple 6- and 7-figure businesses. And we don't just show you what to do. We have an entire team of people available to help you do it, strategy and implementation. You can learn more and reach out to us by visiting conqueryourbusiness.com.
Well, so I sort of want to also framework this. I think that back in, I'm just going to say back in our time, right? Back in our time, you didn't really, there wasn't really much space for being inauthentic and creating storylines and developing.
No one knew it. No
personas,
right?
Everyone just knew everything about you because it was hyper local, right? Now we have all of this sort of dysmorphia. You have all of these people who lose sense of self and identity because they have a social media persona. Then they have who they are persona. Then they have when they're alone persona, right? Like you have all of these different aspects where I think when we were younger, like because the world seemed as big as your surroundings,
as your school district.
Exactly.
It was as big as your school district.
Exactly. Like everyone basically knew who everyone was in a sense, or you couldn't really escape the core person that you were. So like it took determination, it took growth, it took self-introspection. It took a lot to like make it, because you really had to deal with like not just who you were, but like who your family was. You know, what your dad
did when you were a bad kid on Tuesday in school and then you went to church on Sunday. It's the same, like, it was the same group of people and everyone knew what was going on. Yes.
And now you kind of you have the ability, and you described it as
anonymity.
But we hid as people. Now people are able to hide their identity. And I think that there is, just to sort of wrap these two place these two conversations in parallel to one another, right? Like there was a very physical violence around branding, and now there's a very emotional, mental violence around branding.
Absolutely.
Where people are being disempowered due to others' brands. People are being disempowered by their own brand, right? And so it's interesting how branding has shifted from something that was very like physical and concrete and had some emotional aspects, like how do I feel about myself? What's my value? What can I deliver to the world? To something that now is very digital and very emotional and spiritual and mental in
Yeah.
its violence and the violence that it's doing to itself. And so much of my journey has been how to fix that, what that looks like, how do we speak to it, how do we prepare ourselves for it. And I think being on podcasts like yours is part of the solution, is to have these conversations.
Well, and it really is. I've been saying this a lot in conversation, that I think the thing that I really love about podcasting, and right now, podcasting and sharing trading platforms is almost exclusively the way that I network and meet new people. And it's because by the time I get to have, we had a prep conversation, we're doing this, we're doing your, like, by the time you end up spending a good 2.5, 3 real hours with people, like real time with people, not just a social media post, not a promotional email.
Yeah.
Like, I'm tired, I'm going to go do this, the tech ain't working, whatever. Like, we get to watch each other's response to stress live, right? So you really do get, it feels like it is what I love about podcasting. It feels like a way to do an authentic deep dive into somebody and their brand, which also brings me kind of to off of what you said with the emotional impact and danger. And one of the things that I absolutely believe wholeheartedly helps me grow my business is my ability to bring my authentic self to my brand, and how much easier growing my business is because my people are my people. They know they're my people. I don't attract people who aren't my people. It like makes the whole process so much easier. However, I think one of the reasons I'm brave enough to do it is because of how old I am.
Yeah.
As opposed to someone who's younger, growing up in exactly what you're talking about. How are, the challenge of bringing your authenticity forth?
Absolutely. I think what you described is exactly what the difficulties are, right? It's that we're now in an era where the goal is to get everyone to follow you, to get everyone to buy into you, right? And you're not just looking for your niche, you're not just looking for this group of individuals. And that's not to say that certain people are not in that space in terms of their business, their brand, their approach to digital social media, but by and large, our job is not to look at the outliers, but the median, right? Like,
Yeah,
what's the
absolutely.
average person doing, right? What's the person that's out there and they're thinking about scale? What does scale look like for them? And I think for a lot of younger folks, scale looks like everyone. Like, I want everyone to like me. I want everyone to engage with me, right?
Right. It's this all or nothing where if I didn't go viral, I'm a failure.
Exactly. And it sort of hurts because it's this idea that if it's not perfect in the beginning, then it's not valuable,
Yeah.
right? If it's not perfect, it's not valuable. If it's not widely accepted or loved, it's not valuable, right? And I think for a lot of folks, and this is across every age group, every population, I think there's so much learning that happens in trial and error, and in succeeding and failing, right? That in an effort to become perfect, people fail at succeeding, right? Like, they fail at, like, they don't, because you don't get to success by only trying to be perfect. You get to success by embracing every step that is taken, learning from those, applying your lessons, but also requesting things like feedback and critique, which is the antithesis of perfection, because when people only want to hear that they're doing an amazing job, that they're the best at it, that no one can do it better, right? You don't really go through that process of molding and growth and evolution that it really takes for you to get as close to perfect as your brand will, right? So folks fail in trying to succeed.
Yeah. And as much as I push people and try to push, I get out of your comfort zone, do your own thing, and all the cliche teachings, I also have all the empathy in the world for how hard it is, because you're literally up against subconscious programming, you're up against neuroscience, you're up against everything in your being screaming at you, we're all going to die if we do this.
Well, also too, I think that we've now, and listen, guys, this is not a critique on all culture. I know it sounds like we're critiquing on culture, but this is a critique on all culture. But
This is
listen,
not a bunch of middle-aged people.
I know, like just whining
No.
about what's happening in the world. By the way, but I do want to say this, that I do think that we are in this kind of TED Talk culture where we only want to hear about the failure when the person has succeeded. Right? We only want to hear about the failure as a retrospective, not as a lived now experience. So there are so many people that are afraid to fail, and talk about their failure and have people understand their failure, because we've been taught to like succeed and then talk about the failure, as opposed to letting the failure inform what our success could look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And finding the places where you can share that.
Yeah.
Well, and that kind of bridges me to this whole thing that you are now a DJ. Here's why. Why does that make sense in Erin's brain? I have found, you're like, okay, explain this to me. Where's that bridge coming from? I have found that in order for me to do the things as fearlessly as I can muster in my business and everything you're talking about, I have to have other ways for me to be a well-rounded human.
Sure. I think that that's hugely important and valuable. I think that's an amazing point, right? That we do find interest outside of our business, especially as entrepreneurs, that we're not driving our lives completely that way. I think if we want to form healthy relationships with partners and children, then we have to have interests other than our business. Not talk about something other than our business. Like when someone's like, "What are you passionate about?" You're like, "My business."
I have this podcast. Do you want to hear about it?
Exactly. I don't know if that sells, but also I think I took a very unconventional journey into this space, and I found that like a lot of my inspiration has always come from other mediums. That like when I couldn't figure out a problem around advertisement design, then like an architectural structure would inspire me. And so like painting would help me with web design, or like poetry would help me with tagline development. And so I think that like sometimes we become so compartmentalized and structured in our thinking that like we have to look at examples of X to create X, that I'm always looking for inspiration from other spaces. And so I've never been a music person. I am an art person. For people that are listening, I have art all over. She has art all over.
I was noticed you are one of the few people I've talked to that has like cultivated artwork the way that I have cultivated. Like, because I got to ask you about the deer, because here I have, if you want language and ducks in a row, I am your man. I have, if there's a way to have negative artistic ability in painting and things, that'd be me. So the artwork you see around me, even all my tattoo work, I don't tell the tattoo artist exactly. I inspire them. But my idea is going to suck because I'm not good at it. So to me, this is getting to my tattoos are even wearing artwork, right? And so I'm surrounded, because to me, physical artwork is magic, because I can't do it.
It's also magic.
It's inspiring.
No, it's also magic because it, like tattoos, like artwork, it captures what your artist was experiencing, what you were experiencing, what was happening in the world at that moment, what was happening in your life in that.
I love that you say that.
Right? It's like it stamps this accumulation of multiple experiences, right, on this canvas that did not exist before it was done, right? Well, and whereas other art forms can be changed and adapted and come out with multiple versions and still be functionally the same thing. With art and the way we're describing it, once you change it, it's a whole new piece. It's a different thing.
It's so interesting that you say that. So the painting you referred to before, the blue painting in my office, is actually painted on bubble wrap.
Okay.
And it was painted by an older gentleman. at a community art center in a
Yep.
bad neighborhood in Chicago.
Got it.
And it's adjacent to a very affluent neighborhood in Chicago. So when that affluent Obama's neighborhood, when that affluent neighborhood has their art festival, they allow people from the more difficult neighborhood to have an adjacent art festival and get an audience they never otherwise would have been able to get. And so to hear you talk about, I know what that meant to me, because I do that all the time. That's my position, right? That I do, like, I do that all the time. But to hear you going back to this idea of this collaboration, to bring this full circle, that your brand is a mixture of you and your audience. And now I'm looking at this painting that I've moved this 3 times. It has to go in the car by itself because it's bubble wrap. It's very fragile.
Yeah.
Like, now I'm looking at this as a collaboration situation between the artist and myself. Right.
And the city and the like, there's this sense of hopefulness in the
yes, right. That's
so how does someone in an impoverished place find hope, and like, what does that look like, and where did that inspire come from, right? And so you have all of these moments in time, these threads that are then interwoven into a piece. And so when we talk about becoming a DJ, it's weaving in a different form of art for me. Like, it's me looking at a different style and appreciating a different style, but also being able to, as a facilitator of it, as a DJ, create my own mix and create my own portion to that conversation. And so I like that because I think it keeps me on my toes, but it also opens, parts of my brain, parts of my memory, parts of my history, parts of my emotional self. It opens it up to connecting to smells and memories and thoughts and feelings that can not only inform how I function as a human being and as a person, but how I can be impactful for my business, for my clients, for my consumers, because I am evolving my understanding of the world. And when you do that, I think you help everyone.
Well, oh my God. And I so love this because what I hear you describing is immersing yourself in your inspiration, right? Immersing yourself in ever evolving versions of your inspiration. And my version of that is Mother Nature. And I volunteer with wildlife, and I live on an 1.5 acre wooded lot, even though I came out of the city, and I will literally sit in the dirt in my garden because I'm too old to bend over anymore and do the things that I'm doing while the birds are around me, while the animal, like, such an immersion. And I think going back to, like, how do you get through the hard parts is finding that thing for you.
Yeah.
Finding that thing for you.
Finding that thing, and then also being unafraid to share that thing, right? Because here's what I do know, Erin. I do know that we oftentimes monetize what we present to the world, right? Monetize it. We look for transactions from it. I want likes. I want shares. I want money. I want whatever, right? There's something about bringing someone that you trust into your world, not for the purpose of affirmation or critique, but for the purpose of sharing. Because when you're in tough times, it becomes easy to become isolated and insular in how we want to approach life. But the moment that someone else enters into our space and finds joy in the thing that we are finding joy in, and joy, they could find joy in it just from seeing us participate in it and be in that activity. Once you find that opportunity to share, it shows you that the world isn't quite as scary or lonely as it felt in the time that you were going through the thing you were going through. And that can be oftentimes the breakthrough we need. That empathy, that shared experience can be what we need to get us to the next level. And that doesn't matter if you're a coach, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're just a mom, if you're a brother, whatever. Just having an opportunity as a human being to have a shared experience with another human being over something that provides joy to you can be something that changes your experience.
Absolutely. Okay. I don't know where to go from there. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Love it. Love it. If people want to continue this conversation with you, and I highly recommend that they do, what is the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, first, guys, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. I'm going to ask you to pause this podcast if you're playing it on stream, or if you're listening to it, I want you to pause this. And if you found what she is doing to be valuable, I want you to go like, share, subscribe, just do something, right? Like, it takes a lot of work to put these things together, not just from like a production standpoint, but from like a energy standpoint, from like a I want to pour into people standpoint. So if you get an opportunity, just stop. You can come back to me in a second, do something nice for her, and like, share, subscribe, just be a participant in what this podcast is doing. Now, if you like what I'm talking about, then she's going to be on my podcast very soon. So head over to Man vs. Brand, where you can check out our conversation, which will more than likely be a continuation of this conversation. You can also find me at deeonbrown.com, DEEONBROWN.com. That has links to everything. Project Big Brand, which is how I coach, Man vs. Brand, which is my podcast. You find out a lot about art, a lot of the brands that I work with. You can see my portfolio, so you can see the type of stuff that I produced over the time of my career, as all these things, as DJ, as artist, as marketer. And most of all, I think you get to meet other folks in my community. All of those, DeeonBrown.com, Man vs. Brand, they're also on social media channels. And man, thank you guys so much for having me. And I appreciate joining you on this podcast so much.
Thank you so much. I love sharing your energy, your time, your effort, all your insight. I think you have a different way of talking about things that is so important here. So thank you. And I will see you soon.